Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our regularly scheduled but not regularly located Ways and Means Committee meeting for March 24th, 2020. I believe, have a quorum of the committee, but let me just make sure I know who's here since I can't necessarily see. We have Councilmember Warsami.
Yes.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Present.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Here.
Councilmember Johnson.
Here.
And Councilmember Palmisano.
Present.
We are all present and accounted for. Thank you for being here. Our agenda today includes a number of consent items, 44 of them in fact, as well as 2 presentations. I will go ahead and move the agenda for approval. Does anybody have any additions or amendments to the agenda? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the agenda, say aye.
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 Opposed? Opposed? Okay, that carries, and we can move forward.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I'm sorry, this is Casey. I have to interrupt. Under the open meeting law, all votes must be taken by roll call called by the clerk. So we have to do a roll call every time we vote.
Okay, thank you. Clerk, please call the roll to approve the agenda.
Councilmember Cunningham?
Aye.
Jenkins?
Aye.
Johnson?
Aye.
Palmisano?
Aye.
Warsami?
Aye.
Fletcher?
Aye.
There are 6 ayes.
Thank you. We have an agenda, and we'll proceed with the consent agenda. Item number 1 is a legal settlement of a workers' compensation claim with Gerald Schmitz. Item number 2 is a legal settlement, a workers' compensation claim of Michael Greer. Item number 3 is a legal settlement, a workers' compensation claim of Raymond Sombrio. Item number 4 is a legal settlement with the continuing health insurance coverage for John Elland. Item number 5 is a legal settlement with Gregory Johnson, and I'll note that this item was postponed from the last meeting and an amended RCA was distributed to all committee members with updates to the dollar amounts in the settlement. Item number 6, contract amendments with Mortensen Company for carpentry and casework for the public service building project. Item 7 is a contract amendment with RTL Construction for drywall and fireproofing for the public service building project. Item number 8 was a contract amendment with Distinctive Cabinet Design, Inc. for casework and millwork supply for a public service building project. Item number 9 was a contract amendment with Empire House, Inc. for interior glazing and metal panels for the public service building project. Item number 10 is a contract amendments with Danny's Construction Company for structural steel installation for the public service building project. Item number 11 was the contract amendments with Modern Piping, Inc. for mechanical work for the public service building project. Item number 12 was the contract amendments with Lejeune Steel Company for steel supply for the public service building project. Item number 13 was contract amendments with Premier Electrical Corporation for electrical work for the public service building project. Item number 14 is contract amendments with Grazzini Brothers and Company for tile and stone work for the public service building project. Item number 15 is the CenturyLink build-out settlement agreement. Item number 16 is the CenturyLink franchise fee settlement agreement. Item number 17 is the Comcast request for cable television franchise agreement renewal. Item number 18 is the 2020 Local Board of Appeal and Equalization appointments. Item number 19 is a collective bargaining agreement with AFSCME for the Waterworks Maintenance Unit. Item number 20 is a collective bargaining agreement with the Teamsters Convention Center Custodians Unit. Item number 21 is the master contract with the state of Minnesota for employment and training related services from the city. Item number 22 is a contract with Property Solutions and Services, Inc. for emergency stabilization program rental property management. Item number 23 is the Metropolitan Council Livable Communities Local Housing Incentive Account grants for Bloom Lake Flats and Build Wealth, Minnesota. Item number 24 is the 2020 to 24 Consolidated Plan Action Plan budget adjustments. Item number 25 is a grant application to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for corrective lead-based paint hazard activities. Item number 26 is fund transfer between the Green Cost Share and STEM Pathways programs. Item number 27 is an agreement with the University of Minnesota School of Nursing for practicum and internship experiences. Item number 28, gift acceptance from the East Isles Residents Association for fixed camera on Hennepin Avenue. Item number 29 is the Godward Street Northeast Street Resurfacing Project Approval and Assessment. Item number 30 is the South Phillips Residential Street Resurfacing Project Approval and Assessment. Item number 31 is a contract amendment with SJ Electro Systems for the Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition System. Item number 32 is a contract with Downtown Minneapolis Transportation Management Organization for ABC Ramps multimodal outreach programs. Item number 33 is a contract with Metro Transit for Route 2 transit signal priority. Item number 34 is a construction agreement with the University of Minnesota for repairs to Bridge 9 piers. Item number 35 is license agreements for shared motorized foot scooter operations in 2020. Item number 36 is a contract amendment with the Minnesota Department of Transportation for rental of parking lots under I-94 bridges. Item number 37 is an agreement with Minnehaha Creek Watershed District for programmatic maintenance. Item number 38 is an agreement with the Mississippi Watershed Management Organization and Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board for storm sewer system construction and maintenance at the Columbia Golf Course and Park. Item number 39 is MWMO grant for Old Bassett Creek Tunnel cleanout. Item number 40 is a bid for 18th Avenue Northeast Street Reconstruction Project. Item number 41 is a bid for truck parts and services. Item number 42 is a bid for Vineland and Riverfront lighting retrofit project. Item number 43 is a bid for bituminous mixtures, and item number 44 is a bid for ready mix concrete. I will move approval of items 1 through 44 with approval of item 5 as amended. Are there any items that any of my colleagues would like to pull for discussion? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll on the consent agenda.
Councilmember Cunningham,
Aye.
Councilmember Jenkins,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Palmisano,
Aye.
Fletcher,
Aye.
Warsami.
Aye.
There are 6 ayes.
Thank you. The consent agenda is approved, and we will move on to our reports, beginning with the 2020 assessment report given by our city assessor, Patrick Todd, and Rebecca Malmquist. Mr. Todd, I believe you're on mute.
Is that
I can hear you now.
okay? Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, committee members, Patrick Todd, Minneapolis City Assessor. Pleased to present you the 2020 assessment report for the January 2nd, 2020 property values. With me at a remote location is Rebecca Malmquist, the Director of Assessments in my department. And I'm going to give this a whirl to see if I can get these slides to change. Bear with me here. Okay. Okay. With slide number 1 here, just a summary of what we had accomplished for 2020. We did revalue 125,000 properties as of January 2nd. The valuation and classification, which is oftentimes referred to as the value notices, have been printed and are anticipated to go out. They were scheduled to go out at the end of this week, it looks like, because of some because of what's the current status of the environment. It looks like they will be going out as early as Monday of next week. And so property taxpayers will have their valuation notices probably within the next week to 10 days. The 2020 assessment applies to the January 2nd, 2021, or I should say the 2021 property tax bill that property taxpayers will be receiving. And it's really important, and this is something that we are dealing with currently, and that is when this assessment, when property owners receive their valuation notice, that there'll be next week. That is for the time period of October 2018 through September of 2019. So just prior to or leading up to the January 2nd, 2021 or 2020 assessment. Currently, we're starting to field phone calls from property owners that are saying, under the current environment, my property values are dropping. I'd like you to come out and take a look at these. The assessment period that we're looking for are the sales that had occurred between October of 18 and September of 19. So as far as we're concerned, the COVID-19, the impact that we're experiencing today, which is very severe, didn't have an impact based on the sales and valuation for the January 2nd values for property owners at this point in time. Go to the next slide. Our tax base grew about 5%. We went from 55.6 billion to 58.7 billion between 2019 and 2020. And that's all property types. And we do break it out in the next slide. This slide here shows us the breakout between the three major property types. For 2020, our estimated market value, we have 58.5% of our tax base is in the residential property type. We have 19.8% of our tax base as apartment. Oh, thank you. And the commercial industrial makes up 21.7% of our tax base, and that's on market value. But when we actually look at tax capacity, which is the amount of tax each category pays, you'll find that the residential, although it's 58% of our tax base, pays 47.4% of the actual tax. Apartment has a valuation of 19.8 and pays about 18.9% of the tax. And then the biggest difference is when we get into the commercial industrial, they make up 21.7% of our tax base, but pay 33.7% of our property tax. Next slide. This shows a 10-year history over of the estimated market value growth from 2010 to 2020. Of the three major property types, it's interesting to note here that in January 2010, the residential, which is the green, made up 68.3% of our market. Today, it's 58.5% of our market. And in 2010, the apartment market, which was only 9.7% of the value, is currently at 19.8%. Commercial has remained relatively stable over the last 10 years. Where this makes a big difference, next slide, is the net tax capacity. So what you'll find here is back in 2010, the residential market paid 56.6% of the tax capacity, whereas today they're at 47.4%. And when versus the apartment, which was 9.2% of the tax capacity for apartments in 2010, is currently at 18.9%. And one of the questions oftentimes asked by property taxpayers is they'll say, with all this growth, with all these apartments being built, why are my taxes not going down? And here there is this slide does show you that over time, as the apartment market has grown and our tax base has increased, it's actually provided less or is provided relief for the residential market, having gone from 56% of the tax capacity up down to 47%. So it is making a significant difference that our growth in apartment building is actually providing taxpayers with some relief in the residential market. Next slide. This is estimated market value by property type by ward. Kind of an interesting statistic. You know, we see that wards 3 and 7 oftentimes encompass the central business district and the downtown area. Go to the next slide. When we break down the assessment by property type, because when we're doing our assessment, we really do try to value properties by property type. We don't compare single family homes with condominiums. We don't compare duplexes and triplexes with single family or condominiums. And so in our assessment, when we finished the 2020 assessment, we saw a slight growth in condominiums and townhouses. We went from 4.5 billion to 5.5 billion. We did have $68.2 million of new construction in the townhouse and condominium market. But overall, we saw just under a 1% increase in market growth for condominiums and townhouses. Same thing with duplex triplexes, went from 3.7 to 3.9 increase, which is about 6.5%. We also saw $19.3 million in new construction. Single family was 23.9 to 24.5, which is just a little over 1.8% increase, with about $131 million of new construction. Next slide. When we're doing our analysis to make sure that we have a quality assessment, we took a look at 1,367 condominiums and townhouses when we did the valuation of that market. Our sales ratios were at 96.2%, which they have to be between 95 and 105%. So we feel very good about that. We have a COD, which is 6.6. It needs to be under 15 per the Department of Revenue. And the COD, which is the coefficient of dispersion, measures the uniformity of our assessment. And then when we get into the PRD, or the price-related differential, which needs to be between 97 and 103, we were at 100.4. And the PRD measures whereas the COD is level of accuracy, the uniformity, the PRD is the level of uniformity amongst the property type. Duplex triplexes, we had 467 sales. We had a sales ratio of 95.8 with a very good COD and a very good PRD. And same thing with the single family, 3,386 sales, 95% of a sales ratio, 8.6 of a COD, and a 100.4 in a PRD. Next slide. This is a slide that we track internally more than anything else. And what oftentimes as assessors, because we're looking historically, we're oftentimes looking back, like we had said, the October of 18 through September of 19. We're oftentimes chasing the market when it goes up, and we're chasing it when it goes down. When we see the cross between the brown line, which is our estimated market value, versus what the median sales prices are in the market, when we see those cross, oftentimes that's usually the peak when the market changes. We saw this happen back in 2008, 2009, when the market changed, when the foreclosure market had taken off. We thought we would see the market start to pull back, but it surprised us, and it's continuing to go strong again. So it's we're just I'd say a tad bit behind the current market, which when we're looking at sales ratios of 95%, that would probably be the variable right between where our values are and where the market is at this point in time. Single family residential changes. So the large area in this chart, 53.6%, saw no increase in their valuation from January 2nd, 2019 to January 2nd of 2020. The green on the lower left, 21.5, saw a 0 to 5% increase. The yellow is 17.10, that saw a 5 to 9.99% increase. And then 7.4 was increases that were 10% or greater. Next slide. This is a map that is interesting. So when we overlay the percentage changes from the slide before and put that on a parcel level and then attach a color to it, you'll see that the very light color from the bottom, if you're looking at the legend, is showing less than a 10%. So those would be reductions in value. To a fairly neutral or a vanilla with no change in value. And then you go all the way up to the darker blue, which is properties with an increase of 10% or greater. When we look at this map overall, where we found some of the changes that had 10% or greater. Those are the areas where we had still the most affordable housing stock available. I would say that the median sale prices or the median assessed values that we currently have are located in these neighborhoods at this point in time. Next slide. When we place all those parcels and we lump them together, we can come up with an aggregate change by neighborhood. And this map then shows exactly that. And again, you can see where the darker blue and the lighter blue are where the market is changing the most rapid. And again, these are where we're finding that between last year and this year, from what properties were selling for to where our assessed value was at, these were areas that were, again, still higher than we had them assessed for. And so we're just following the market as it goes up in these areas. When we break it down by ward, because I know that council members do like to keep this information by ward, we aggregated it by what last year's value was to what the January 2nd, 2020 was, how much new construction was in each area or was in that particular ward. What is the market change? So that the column where it says percent change less new construction, we would be attributing that to what did the market do. And then you could add on what the new construction did on top of that. But those are the 4.17 in Ward 1 is what we would have felt would have been what the overall market did in that area. The median value is, let's say for Ward 1 was 260,000 based on 449 sales. We have a median sale price of 274,100, and our sales ratios in Ward 1 were at 95.36%. We do like to take a look and see what does the multiple listing or the Northstar MLS indicate as well. So currently the median sale price based on MLS data, which their data is their own, they don't use our data. They had an indication that the real estate market in Minneapolis went up 5.7% over the 2018. And I think that should be actually 2019. I apologize. The median percent of original is currently when properties are listed, they're getting 100% of what they're listing them for. The marketing time is only up 1 day over 2018. And then the month supply currently is 1.9 months of inventory currently out on the market. They would say a fairly normalized market would be 3 months or longer. And then just a few more slides. This is the commercial industrial market. We did see a 5.9% increase in the commercial tax space. We saw $226 million of new construction. We saw about 6.1% increase in the industrial with $9.4 million of new construction. Based on sales ratio information for those particular sectors, the commercial, we had 75 commercial sales with a median sales ratio of 94.8. We did see a COD of 13.1 and a PRD of a 105. When we get into industrial, only 9 sales, but we don't have that much industrial in our tax space. We had a 96.6% sales ratio, 8% COD, and because there weren't enough indicators or enough sales to give a good indication of a PRD, one is not calculated. And then overall, we did have 84 sales total between the two categories, a 95% ratio, a 13 COD, and 104 aggregate on the price-related differential. When we break down the commercial industrials by sub-market, between hotel, industrial, office, medical, retail, other commercial and vacant land, you can see over time the areas of growth. Our office has grown from 48.2 in 2010 up to 52.4. Again, probably the other commercial, I can't on my screen determine what that is. I'm sorry. But it's just nice, again, it's nice to see this historical perspective on where our market has gone over the last 10 years between these subsectors. In our apartment market, we did see from 2019, we had $11.8 billion in apartment market. It had 13.1 for January 2nd. We did see $685 million in new construction, and the overall market increased 5.4% on 105 sales with a median sale price of a 95.6, with a COD of 6 and a PRD of 102. So very good statistics on our apartment market. I think this is the second to my last slide. So this is what the valuation notice looks like that property tax payers will be receiving next week. Again, they're being mailed. They should be in the mail this week, but if not, it'll be Monday. We have discussed, because of the current state of emergency, there will be no on-site inspections to be done because of the COVID-19 concerns. The notices are blue. That's how we can determine when we're looking at the valuation statement on our side, and we're making sure that the property owner is looking at the correct valuation statement on the other end of the phone based on the color of the notice. Information about contacting our office and appeals is on the notice. The applications are being submitted online, by mail, or in person. We have worked with the CPED and Reg Services that we do have a drop box that allows property taxpayers to swing by, fill out the information, and put it in a drop box without having any contact with staff. And then we do have a few other tools that are available. We have what's called a comp finder that allows property taxpayers to go out to our website, put in their information, and find sales within their area. If they have any questions whether their property is fairly assessed or not, we also have a property tax calculator. And this is just a historical trend on appeals. We have no idea what this year will be like. We feel like, again, our residential market went up, but probably not as rapidly as it had gone up in the past. But nonetheless, we have seen in the last 2 years, property tax increases in the range of 80 to 300% over the last couple of years. So we're hoping that we don't have a similar increase in appeals, but if it does, we are prepared to be working with the taxpayers remotely and try to solve the valuation issue from a safe distance. And again, through I think what we're doing, we'll be working with photography, property owners providing us more information, like if they happen to have an appraisal currently with interest rates so low, we're finding that a lot of people are refining, and if they happen to have that appraisal, that information would be very helpful. And we're going to be trying to do all the appeals without having to have any face-to-face contact with the taxpayer. We'll keep you posted on this. Last but not least is the assessment. The key dates that we have are the valuation notice. Again, we were supposed to go out this week, but we expect it to be probably Monday. May 6th is the beginning of our local board, and we're currently working with the clerk's office to determine if we can do something similar to the valuation or the council meeting today, doing something that is remote using video. May 13th is the local Board of Appeal and Equalization when we reconvene, and then we do have the Hennepin County Board of Appeals on June 15th. And the last slide is our quintile, and this map will show you where we'll be working for the summer of 2020 for the assessment of 2021. And with that, that'll be the end of my presentation. I'd stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Todd, and I appreciate, as always, the reminder, especially given the likely economic changes that people are at least speculating about as we're in the early days of the pandemic. The reminder that these are backward looking and that these assessments are going to be based on values from fall 2018 to fall 2019, I think is going to be important for us to re-articulate again and again as people struggle to understand this. I see a question from Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Todd. I actually have a few questions. So on slide 11, you had shown the two lines where the sale price versus the estimated market value and how those crossed. And you said the last time that happened was before and during the housing foreclosure crisis. So when we see that happen, is that a warning sign that we should heed, or yes, like is that something of concern?
Through the chair, Councilmember Cunningham, am I heard? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay, thank you. It's really we're just measuring the market. There's nothing that we as in the assessor's office can do. It's just one of those telltale signs that when it was to us, it just usually indicates that the market, because as you just take a look at the median sale price by the market, it's starting to between 18 and 19 to plateau, and usually it'll continue to plateau or start to pull back, which is a normal real estate cycle. They say cycles running around 15 years from bottom to peak, and then another 15 years from peak to bottom. Or excuse me, from bottom to top to bottom is about every 15 years. And this just would have been a perfect bell curve for something like that, but it looks like the market is not ready to change at this point in time. So I wouldn't say it's anything to be concerned with. I don't see anything on the horizon that would indicate that we're going to have anything like the 2008 foreclosure market at all. It just means that right now in 2019, we're tracking exactly where the market is. And right now, based on our sales ratios of 95%, we're 5% behind the market at this point in time. What we would not like to see, and what, again, if we were probably to track this over during the foreclosure market, you would have actually seen where our assessed values, that brown line was higher than the market value. And that's always a distressful time. And we never like to see that. We would always like to make sure that we're at the market or tracking with the market and not above the market. So it's probably a better indicator of where our assessed value is in relationship to the market.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. If I may, Mr. Chair, with another question. So on slide 12, you show the percentage breakdown of where there's change and then the various levels. I think it's great that 53.6% of the city is not seeing a change, but it is very concerning that out of that 7.4, that for the second year in a row, it's disproportionately North Minneapolis that is seeing the change. So, sorry, on the next slide of slide 13, we can see that concentration again. Last year, I think it was red when it was 20% or more, and now it's a darker blue, and so we can see it yet again heavily concentrated. This is going to be a huge concern for my constituents. As you mentioned, this is really considered one of the last places in the city where there's an affordable housing stock, and if we see the property values keep increasing, then they are no longer going to be an affordable housing stock. So can you please explain to the public kind of like the factors that go into the estimated market value, and because one concern that folks have in particular is around Upper Harbor Terminal and that redevelopment happening, but that's something that's happening in the future. And I know that this is based on the past. And so can you just explain that so folks have a better understanding?
Sure. Through the chair, Councilmember Cunningham, these colors are reflecting the percentage change that my staff needed to make to become closer to the what's happening in the market. So we'll take a look at every sale, and we'll look at every sale across the city of Minneapolis. There were, I think, 3,200 residential sales. We will say if it sold for 200, what was the assessed value? Was it at 190 or was it at 220, 230? And in every case, we're trying to be right at what the properties are selling for. So when we take a look in North Minneapolis and we said, okay, it sold for 100, where was our assessed value? Consistently, we would have been sitting at 85 or 88 or maybe 90. And well, where did we need to be? Well, we need to be at 95 to 100. So how much do we have to move property values to get to where properties are selling? Because that's really the statutory requirement. The statutory requirement says we're supposed to be valuing properties at 100% of what they sell for. So this color is just a reflection of how much did the assessor have to increase property values to reflect what buyers and sellers are transacting in that particular area. And some of it is just, again, because of the price point and interest rates are low and people are out there saying that I can still afford to buy a house in this area and my payments are at or maybe even less than rent. So, and as far as the upper Mississippi Harbor terminal, you would see probably if that was the case, if there was a positive influence, that you're going to probably see a greater influence closer to the river. We're actually seeing quite a bit of blue fairly equally spread across the near north and the Camden area. So it's just saying this map is just saying it's not that we're increasing values there for any particular reason. We're saying that blue represents how far we were from what's actually happening in that real estate market. And again, if we were to go back and change this, if we were to take a historical perspective and go to Southwest, we would have seen probably coming out of that foreclosure market that the blue would have been in the Southwest area because that area came back faster than any other area. And in fact, it would have been just the reverse. We would have seen Southwest going up and there are still areas of North Minneapolis that were going negative, where property values were still dropping because the foreclosure market was still so much more prevalent there. So if we were to just take a longer, a larger perspective on it, this is the time when North Minneapolis is seeing a lot of equity built up. They're seeing a lot of real estate transactions that probably hadn't been there for many years. And while I agree that it can be disconcerting that the price points might just price some taxpayers out, this is a good thing that we have a lot of people looking to buy in North Minneapolis and are building equity and transacting.
So to make clear, the sales of the houses are what influences this. So if somebody, let's say, buys a house on a block for $50,000 over the asking price, that then increases the surrounding houses' property values as well. Is that how that works?
That would be. We would take a look at all the sales in a very geographic area. So let's say one particular property sold for $50,000 more. We would not then focus saying that everything in that particular area would be worth $50,000 more. We're going to take a look at all the sales in the area and go, what is the average change or what is the median change in that area? If we try to even narrow it down, is it between 2 stories? Is it between duplex, triplex? Was it a condition issue? So we're going to really dig into why did that particular property sell for $50,000 more than the assessed value? And if that's pretty indicative, if that's that 50,000 is pretty consistent amongst all the sales, then yes, we're moving everybody up at that same rate. But we just don't take a look at one sale and say, well, that represents the entire market. So, but
great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We have a question from Councilmember Palmisano.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Here I'm trying to get, trying to see 2 things on my screen at once. So, Mr. Todd, as you know, the state income tax filings have just been delayed. There were some things you mentioned in your presentation, one in halting the in-person visits for those disputing their property values, and those seem quite helpful. And that was new information to me. I know we're all drinking from a fire hose here. Thank you. I'd like to try and share that information in a newsletter, as I bet would all of my colleagues here, as people get their property valuation notices in the mail, as you mentioned. And so I was curious if you could help us to suggest some language or write something that's really specific and clarifies that, if you haven't already. I'm curious, since people did receive their Hennepin County property tax statements in the mail last week, if we are considering or able to offer any delay in those invoice due dates. I believe they're due in two halves, May 15th being the first and the second due date being October 15th. Are we working with the county and all other taxing entities on anything like this? I mean, many homeowners escrow this. I guess I assumed always that most homeowners escrow this from their mortgage payments. But I'm hearing personally from several that don't, that would see this as some sort of temporary relief. I always say back to them that, you know, that this goes into our own budget's general fund, and thus funds are very core essential city services, right? Public works and first responders. But is there any consideration with all of, again, I know only a portion is the cities, and then there's the counties, the school districts, etc. Are we working on something like this to be able to make exceptions to that first half due date for May 15th?
Through the chair, Councilmember Palmisano, we do have an email. I do have an email into Director John Kloxim from the Department of Revenue, the Property Tax Division, to find out if there is discussions currently over at the Department of Revenue for extending that May 15th, because I do recognize that, especially in the commercial market, when we've asked bars and restaurants to close, that to ask them to be paying their first half taxes could definitely be a hardship. So right. I can definitely, as soon as I get a reply back from the Department of Revenue, I'd be happy to share that information with you as well as the entire council.
I think everybody would be, would really like to know that information. So are you saying that the decision maker here, the decision point, is at the state level? I was assuming it was at the county level.
Through the chair, Councilmember Palmisano, I would expect it to be something that the Department of Revenue would have to advise, and then I think the governor would have to sign off on. I don't think that the county has the ability to change that date. But okay. I will check, but I'm fairly confident on that.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you both. If there is I see a question from Council President Bender. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not on the committee, but wanted to be here for this today. I do think the questions are really important and may kind of bleed into the next section or the agenda item related more specifically to our budget updates. And I do wonder if we want to think about adding something to the communication that goes out for Monday, knowing that it's a very quick turnaround, but also that we're in really challenging times. And if we are working on giving people options or delayed payments, it seems important to communicate that to our taxpayers. So I did ask for this item to be added to our policy group agenda for tomorrow that the mayor and council vice president and I participate in Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. So I think we can collect these kinds of questions from council members' offices and hear from all the different staff, you know, from IGR and from finance, along with Mr. Todd on this issue, which in some sense is about assessments, but really is more broadly about, you know, our property tax collection policies and state tax policies and timelines. So I think they're really important questions, and we may want to move quickly again before any communication goes out.
Thank you for that. I saw that Rebecca Malmquist had a comment related to the inspections.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
I can. Thank you for being here.
Wonderful. Chair Fletcher, I just did want to respond to Councilmember Palmisano's question about on-site inspections. We are in coordination with Hennepin County and all the other surrounding jurisdictions and are in alignment that we will not be conducting any on-site inspections. We are looking at collecting additional photographs than we would normally collect, and then some kind of virtual inspection utilizing FaceTime and Skype technology if there are certain factors or characteristics of a property that the property owner would want us to see. So we are extending those options to property taxpayers as needed.
Thank you.
We will get you some additional language for you to use, though.
Thank you very much for that. I know we're all going to be looking for that and certainly want to be communicating with our constituents in a variety of ways about what these notices mean. I know that everybody's in a little bit of a state of heightened anxiety, so everything that comes in the mail they're paying close attention to, and we want to make sure that we're communicating. So I appreciate you sharing all of that. I don't see anybody else in queue, so I'll pause for just a second to see, Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you. Thank you. Pushing all the wrong buttons. So I wanted to actually ask a question around how do we potentially maybe stabilize the increase, for example, in North Minneapolis. If we were to, if there were to be, for example, more land bank properties or properties that are in some way held affordable into perpetuity, how does that then impact the overall area's estimated value, estimated market value?
To the chair, Councilmember Cunningham, if that's a great question. It's somewhat of a speculative question, but what I would probably say is the purchases, when we take a look at sales and sales ratios, what are properties selling for, what's the assessed value? If we put properties into a land bank, those generally aren't indicative of what the market is doing. Therefore, they wouldn't be included in the overall sales ratio calculation. So let's say we had 400 sales in North Minneapolis, and 100 of them we could get into a land bank situation. We wouldn't even be doing a calculation on those 100. We'd only have then 300 to rely upon for the sales ratio. We're still going to be looking at willing buyer, willing seller. And so if between the willing buyer, willing seller, if they're continuing to pay 10 or 15% more than where we're at, we're still going to move them up 10 or 15% just to be marching with the real estate market. And then the ones in the land bank, unless the land bank somehow has an exemption, which I'm not sure if they do or don't, I would assume that we would then apply that same rate to properties that are sitting in a land bank, short of if it was an exemption situation.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Seeing no further questions, I will instruct the clerk to receive and file that report. Thank you, Director Todd and Ms. Malmquist, for joining us. Thanks for that information and for your continued support of our constituents. And we'll move on to the final item on the agenda, which is the 2019 fourth quarter financial status report. And I'll just say this turns out to be timely. It's sort of a standard quarterly report that we receive and file, and that often doesn't mean a whole lot, but I think it gives us an opportunity right now because, you know, as when things are happening basically as expected, it's a way of just confirming that cash is flowing as expected. It gives us an opportunity right now, I think, to make sure that we really understand our cash flows at a moment that we're going to be getting a lot of unusual questions about our financial position. And so I appreciate Budget Director Micah Intermill being prepared to give us this report and perhaps make it a little more forward-thinking rather than backward-looking report than it would typically be. Director Intermill. Okay, it looks like we are live, and Thank you, everybody, for joining us for the exciting conclusion of our regularly scheduled Ways and Means Committee meeting after that cliffhanger ending. We've resolved our technical difficulties, and we are back on and ready to hear the 2019 fourth quarter financial status report from Budget Director Micah Intermill and from Lori Johnson.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. As I was saying, we wanted to use this time to provide an update on what we're seeing in finance right now as potential impacts of the response to COVID-19. Just word of caution with the numbers we're going to be sharing is much uncertainty exists right now, and I'm reminded of a quote that I saw from a former boss of mine, the state of Minnesota Commissioner of Management and Budget, was in the Wall Street Journal last week saying, right now, the place we're at is question mark times question mark equals question mark. And I think that that was actually a really good way of underscoring the some of the uncertainty we're seeing. That said, there is early data that we're seeing that gives us a chance to provide you some information as we know it. So that's what we're sharing today. Lori Johnson, our Deputy CFO, is also going to share some information about what we've already authorized for purchase in response to COVID-19 as an enterprise, and talk to you about several other COVID-19 financial factors that are on our radar. So if we could go to the first slide. Sorry, the next slide. So just an overall message here is that our total budget revenues for 2020 are about 1.7 billion. This slide represents potential losses of between 45 and 120 million, depending on the length and depth of social distancing. The reason that comes into play is because largely our city revenues outside of property taxes are dependent on consumption. So we don't have the ability to levy general taxes aside from property tax unless the state says we can. So typically it's a fee-for-service arrangement where if someone opens a business and we engage in regulatory activity, we collect a fee. If someone uses water, we provide out of the tap, we provide that water and we collect a fee, etc. So with the social distancing that we're seeing, consumption is down and so revenues are being impacted. The first place that we looked about a week and a half ago was at local taxes. And based on what we know from current cancellations of activity at the convention center, just various postponement of sporting events, not only here in Minneapolis, but nationally, cancellations at entertainment venues and other early indicators from the local economy, what we're seeing is that at a minimum, we will see reduced revenues in our local taxes of about 15%. And the longer the social distancing lasts, we could see upwards of a 55% loss compared to our budget. And in these remarks, I'm in no way advocating one way or another as to which way we go on social distancing. I'm just explaining that has an impact on our revenues, and that is how we are thinking about what the longer term impacts might be. So moving down that, or if we have any questions, we can pause.
I can only see half of the slide. Is there any way that someone can fix that? Mike, maybe?
So I'm not able to fix the slides. So if someone from communications could chime in.
I think I just heard somebody run past over to Council Vice President's office.
Great. Yeah. So if it pleases the chair, I'll just continue if there aren't any questions immediately on local taxes. So the next area of revenues we see, which go into the city's parking fund, are those parking fees. And so the logic follows that if folks aren't coming downtown to work, or they aren't going to uptown to restaurants and bars, then they aren't going to be paying for parking. As with local taxes, we expect to see a minimum of about a 15% drop in those parking fees, but our upward estimate of what we may see a reduction in is about 40%. And that's just reflective of the fact that we do have some monthly parking contracts, so there's a little bit of inelasticity built in. And we've been working directly with Public Works, who's been very good to work with on this, as they have some near real-time data on parking that they've been able to share with us and develop those estimates. Our interest earnings are a little bit of a different animal, and we do receive interest earnings not only to the general fund but other funds. Because our options for investments are limited to various low-risk securities and related vehicles, the extent of the market volatility is limited. We're seeing extreme volatility in the stock market, but again, we are in much more vanilla type investments at the city. So there's a floor there. The challenge is we are at the floor. Most of the investment options are linked directly or indirectly to the federal funds rate, and since that's already as low as it can go, we do have a pretty good idea where our investment earnings will end up. This was an estimate that Mike Ablin, our Director of Debt and Investments, shared yesterday, that we are likely to end the year with our investment earnings at about 40 to 45% below our budget. Construction licenses and permits are also a little bit interesting here. I think that I had a lengthy conversation this morning with Steve Poor, Director of Development Services, and he's taken a look at the first quarter of applications for permits and licenses, and we're seeing activity that's about 15% lower than the first quarter for 2019. Now, the good news is, in all of this, last year during the development of the 2020 budget, we worked with the mayor, and at the time we were seeing an inversion of the yield curve, which is a leading indicator for an economic recession. Of course, COVID wasn't on anybody's radar, but the recognition that we may see a slowdown soon was with us while we were putting together the budget. And so we had planned on less activity in 2020 than we saw in 2019. So on the slide, you see a floor of 12% as opposed to 15%, and that just explains that difference. The 25% upper end represents what we would see in a Great Recession type scenario if the construction activity dried up. I think that what's important to keep in mind with respect to construction permits is that in January and February, we were still in a very strong economy, and there was a lot moving into the pipeline. So right now, a lot continues to move through the pipeline. And in talking with Mr. Poor, he agreed that builders will continue to build as long as they can. And so we don't necessarily expect to see construction slow down like you might naturally assume when we're seeing the vast slowdown in our local taxes, for instance. On business licenses, there will be some impacts there, but we're not quite ready to put projections to this category yet. The mayor issued an emergency regulation relating to the suspension of collection of fees associated with liquor licenses. That will postpone the receipt of the revenues. It doesn't mean we won't get those revenues at all. It just delays the receipt. Now, depending on the duration of the heavy social distancing and the prohibition from that in-store activity, the reality is some businesses may not make it back, so that could ultimately impact collections for business license fees. But that's a little bit different than it being directly related to the emergency regulation. Other business license fees may be impacted as well, and we're looking at those. The final category here that I wanted to share, and then I'll pause, is again, working with our colleagues in Public Works. We're understanding some of the potential for softness in our budget for utility charges. So meaning the regular bills that folks pay based on usage. So speaking for me personally, I was expecting that these revenues would be pretty solid because demand for utilities is pretty inelastic. But what we learned was that, and I think it makes sense once you think through it, for the most part, they are inelastic, except that our population grows during the workday when the typical 9 to 5 Monday through Friday, when there are folks who live outside of Minneapolis but work in town. And when they are in town, they're using water, using sanitary sewer services. Then when they go home, they're not relying on City of Minneapolis services. And since those charges are dependent on consumption, again, lower consumption means lower revenues. So as folks stay out in those surrounding communities, we've got less water being used, less sewer being used. So we expect revenues for those utilities to come in at about 5 to 12% lower than our budget. I'll pause there and see if we have any questions.
I don't see any, thank you.
Great, thanks. So if we can go to the next slide then. With all of that said, regarding the vulnerability on the revenue side, we do have some tools available at our disposal, and there are some fundamentals of the situation that help us out. I think the first and biggest tool we have to handle the economic impacts is time. It's early in the year, and that gives us the ability to respond to what we're seeing on the revenue side by evaluating our spending options. And a good example of this is when we think about our Downtown Assets Fund. It was built with potential downturn in mind. We weren't expecting a doomsday scenario. Doomsday is a bad term, but we weren't expecting a sharp downturn. But we recognize that markets and the economy has cycles to it, and so the relief valve for lower expenditures in the Downtown Assets Fund is we can do less capital than we had planned. Those expenditures can be dialed back if revenues don't exist to support that spending, so that we can get into the next year and reevaluate as opportunities present themselves to make additional investments. So that's kind of what I mean when I'm talking about the fact that we have time on our side. If we were at November, we would have spent much of the budget according to our plan, and then there just wouldn't be the ability to respond. So again, being in March, we feel good about that. The second tool that we have at our disposal is a strong cash position. We don't have unlimited cash resources, but we do have cash available, and we have to be prudent about how we deploy those, but the fact that they're there puts us ahead of the curve. As we think about the internal services in particular, as an example here, we run a fleet business, an IT business, a self-insurance business, and a rent business. These are all within the city. We are our own customer, and so we can adjust the charges if needed in a way that the cash balances pick up some of the expense, so that we don't have to charge directly to departments, so that we're able to free up that cash resource. And so that just will that's a way that we can deploy our current cash to help us maintain our current level of service. And the third bullet point here is that underlying all of this, I think it's important to note that the state is working quickly and powerfully with respect to the economy, and notably they're doing that with local governments in mind. So the specific example I have for you here relates to the collection of local taxes. So many, if not all of you, know that local taxes were due from merchants on the regular monthly schedule on March 20th, so last Friday. When merchants remit those taxes, they report both on their monthly sales and the amount of taxes that they owe to the state, and then the state ultimately passes on to the city based on those sales. So they report those two numbers, and then they also put in their payment of taxes. And last week, the state announced that they wouldn't be charging a penalty for those merchants who paid less than the amount reported as owed. So if you owe $1,000, you only paid $500. The state said, we understand what's going on. We understand the situation. We aren't going to charge you a late fee for that second $500 owed. Eventually, those amounts will likely be paid, but it creates a sort of a cash flow challenge. Well, yesterday, we learned from the League of Minnesota Cities that the state is planning, at least for the March 20th payment, to pass along to the local units of government the amount that merchants reported as owed, as opposed to the amount that merchants paid. So the state is absorbing the delayed payment so that local units such as Minneapolis don't have to cash flow that activity. And so that's greatly helpful to the city, and I think it's just a good representation of the support we're getting from the state, and that we certainly hope continues. Any questions about those 3 points? If not, I'll turn it over to Lori to speak to some of the immediate impacts on the expense side that we're seeing, and also some, as I mentioned, some of the financial factors related to COVID-19 that we're currently monitoring.
Thank you, Micah. But you could advance this slide, please. So Budget Director Intermill talked about the revenue reductions we may be seeing. In addition to that, there are some resource requests. So we're going to have some expenditures to deal with this issue as well. You might recall that we approved the emergency regulation to allow us to put into place the Minnesota statute allowing the city to bypass bidding requirements. That was approved by the mayor last week. Those expenditures are only related to COVID-19, and they must be greater than $2,500 and run through our emergency operations process. I also want to let you know that the Civil Rights Department is included in that process because we know the importance of that issue throughout as we secure goods. So they are automatically looped into those purchases. The current amount that we have seen come across for COVID-19 expenditures is about $500,000. The majority of that being PPE, personal protective equipment, masks, suits, goggles. The major purchase that we had was $350,000 for 500,000 masks that OEM requested as part of their pool of or cache of equipment that they allocate. The other part of this is cleaning and sanitation supplies. The police vehicles make it clean more thoroughly. Our buildings are being cleaned very thoroughly. Hand sanitizer, all of those little things that people need to do their jobs effectively. And then the other component of that is about $90,000 to $100,000 for additional IT resources to increase our remote work capabilities. We obviously have a lot more people working remotely than we've had in the past. There were expenditures that IT needed to make to do that. They did this very quickly. Very good response from them to get our workforce set up working remotely, because we want to continue to have our employees do the work that we need to have them do. I do want to note that the number you have in front of you, the 500,000, is as of yesterday. We are new to this process. We are still gathering data that may be adjusted slightly as we go forward, but we will continue to give those updates as required in the emergency regulations so that you can see what the major purchases are that are coming through for COVID. And with that, unless there are any questions, I'll advance to the next slide. Right. If you could advance, please. Thank you. Other issues that we are dealing with, employee sick time changes for employees who are out. The mayor also approved another emergency regulation, 2020-6, that outlaid some additional sick time for emergency responders and provided other provisions for employees. Obviously, we're very concerned about city employees. We need to have core services continue. We have a lot of other work that needs to be ongoing, even through this crisis. So it's important that our employees are working, but it's also important that they take care of themselves, because that is critical. They are very important to us. We want to make sure that happens. So that concern is ongoing. We do anticipate that today a document will be going out to all employees, laying out the various leaves that are available to them. And I'm going to go through some of these very, very briefly, because they will all be in that document coming out. But there are federal, state, and city actions that are taking place around this topic. As you know, the federal government approved the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, HR 6201. It has two components, one related to emergency sick leave and the other to an expanded emergency paid family leave. There are different provisions and nuances with those. We've tried to lay some of them out in the FAQ that will go out today. We are waiting for implementation guidance from the federal government. Once we have that, we know, or we will then know how we can implement it for our employees. It is effective on or before April 2nd, so it is not yet effective. So the timing of that and the city's regulation are slightly off, but we are working to coordinate those two together. We need to make sure they sync up and that we are giving the employees the benefits they deserve and the options that they have for taking leave time. And like I said earlier, we do have a good share of our workforce at home working remotely. We have others who must be on the front lines, and we certainly want to acknowledge the work that they're doing. And being on the front lines is not an easy thing during this time, and we appreciate all that they are doing. So with that, I am going to kind of leave that topic because it is complex when you get into all the details. If after you get the information, you have questions, you should reach out to HR, or you can also contact me. On to the medical self-insurance, we do anticipate, of course, that there might be some uptick in insurance costs. We are self-insured. We have a $350,000 stop loss on an individual claim. That means once a claim reaches $350,000, our insurance kicks in, our reinsurance kicks in. We also have an aggregate stop loss. That is 125% of anticipated claims. Our anticipated claims or budgeted claims were about $60 million, so an additional $15 million would need to be spent over and above our anticipated claims before that would kick in. But we do have stop loss. We also have reserves in place. You might recall that we set up self-insurance in January 1 of 2018. We've got reserves from 18, also 19. So we feel that we will be in fine shape at the end of the year. However, it will really depend upon how many major COVID-19 issues we have and how many other major illnesses and issues that we have. Workers' compensation. We are also self-insured, as you know, for workers' compensation. There is some legislation pending that would change the applicability of workers' compensation for COVID-19. The Department of Labor and Industry Commissioner Nancy Lippick hosted a phone conference yesterday. We participated, Jean Ranieri and I did, to talk about the impact of that legislation on the city of Minneapolis. And it's a little unique for us because we are self-insured both for work comp and medical. So we will pay those medical bills either way, but we are concerned about the impact on the indemnity piece for workers' compensation, which is the loss of work piece. And of course, we want to make sure that the benefits that we have in place, where we have the additional 80 hours for emergency responders, that all coordinates with workers' compensation And the federal bill, the way the workers' compensation language is drafted now, it would not take into account the additional leave that we have given for our emergency responders. So we at least want some provision for that extra benefit that the city of Minneapolis has given to its workers. So we will continue to monitor that and give you updates as needed on that legislation. Overtime costs, Micah and his team were able to present estimates on a lot of the revenues. We've been trying to do that on expenditures as well. Overtime cost is something that's difficult for us to estimate. We don't know because until we know how many staff members we'll have out, it's really hard to calculate overtime costs. What I can say is that we will be tracking those. There is some provision in the FEMA federal reimbursement for payment of overtime costs related specifically to COVID-19. So we will continue to monitor that and do what we need to do to make sure our emergency responders are able to respond to our residents. Moving on to, again, the potential for federal reimbursement. There are three categories where we believe we will be able to get some reimbursement. There has been some FEMA guidance issued, but I kind of give the caveat with all of these that anything can change as we go along. So we are trying to be flexible and not hang our hat on something that may not occur. We are tracking our expenses very carefully so that if we do get reimbursement from federal government and the state, we will have that data to request that reimbursement. So on the federal side, based on their current guidance, there are three areas of possible reimbursement. Those include security and law enforcement, so our typical police, fire, and it also may include civil rights, regulatory services, and health for COVID-19 services that they provide. Overtime, as we discussed, could also be one of those items. And then public health, the community, the cleaning of public facilities. So there are some areas that we can recoup costs. Obviously, there are a lot of other individuals who are spending the time on this issue, and we will not receive reimbursement for those services. As far as the state, at this time, we don't know what reimbursements will be available. Perhaps there will be some. And of course, we will do everything we can, like I said, to track those costs and to be ready for submitting reimbursements on any of those issues. And I believe that covers all of the other financial factors. So at this time, if you want to advance the slide, please, I think we just want to make sure that we are providing the information that you want. And with that, Micah, I'll also turn it back to you in case you have any concluding comments.
Great. Thank you, Lori. I think that's exactly right. At this point, we were hoping to hear from you, council members, to see what other information is needed, what's helpful for you as you continue to work on behalf of the city and your constituents, and as we continue to all drink from this fire hose.
I see a question from Councilmember Palmisano. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilmember Fletcher. Director Intramural, I'm curious, we have been receiving a lot of contacts that seem not urgent right now, given all that we're dealing with, but people are inquiring about, say our last cycle or two of financial decisions, and if there's any opportunity to go back and revisit them in light of this kind of sudden turning point in the market. And I'm just curious in general, do we have staff available to even do that? Are some more practical than others? Are there any in particular that we're looking at? Who would help us do such a thing in the finance department?
So, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Palmisano, I think, sorry about that. That was my telephone ringing at a very inopportune time. Apologize for that. So I think that it's a good question. If I'm understanding it correctly, the question is, can we undo some budget decisions of the past And I think that the answer to that question is always yes. I mean, when the mayor proposes a budget each year and the council adopts it, there's always that ability to go back and revisit old decisions. I think that typically that reinvestigation happens in times of financial stress and when we see downturns, and so now would be a natural time and place to be doing that. If there are particular areas of concern for either council members specifically or through constituents, from constituents to council members, please do be in contact with my office, and we can work with you to gather that information. I can say that earlier today, the mayor did send out guidance, sort of updated budget instructions to departments, letting them know that at this point in time, the plan is for a current service level budget for 2021, recognizing that the financial impacts we're talking about are likely not isolated to this year. So that is an update that you can share with your constituents. And I think anything more specific than that, and I think this will be a general answer you'll be hearing from both Lori and I, is because of all the uncertainty, because things are unfolding rapidly, we'll get back to you with specifics.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'll put myself in queue, and other council members should feel free to join in, whether you're on the committee or not. I think this is a good opportunity for us to have some discussion about this. I guess I think I'm getting a lot of questions, particularly from small businesses, about what our capacity is at various levels of government to do any kind of granting or support. And I think it'd be helpful to sort of contextualize where we're at in thinking through what our cash resources are, hearing that we're looking at current service level, that there's we know that we're taking these hits in these particular ways. I think being able to explain to people sort of the scale of the problem, we think, and the scale of what the city's potential investment into the solution would be a helpful thing. I'm not expecting an answer to that today, but I think just in terms of guidance around, moving forward, sort of what are the tools at our disposal, and then I would also say, if you have any sense of, obviously right now we're in a state of emergency where the mayor has unusual authority to allocate resources. I'm curious if any of the things that he's already done have an impact that we can measure, or sort of how that conversation is going, to the extent that you're being consulted on decisions that are getting made under executive power right now. And I believe you're muted.
The good news is I talk with my hands. Mr. Chair, it's a good question. Lori, please jump in if I miss anything. I think we can certainly look at that ability to do granting and support, particularly as we continue to refine our cash flow estimates and look at our needs. On the question specific to businesses and what is the city doing right now, this is a little bit outside of finances lane, but I know that CPED is doing a great job of putting FAQs out on the website. So if anybody's watching this who has not yet visited the website for that small business FAQ, strongly recommend doing that. And then in terms of the question with respect to what are the impacts of some of the decisions that have been made so far under the emergency regulations, so far, from our tracking, we are not seeing any expenses beyond that which are already budgeted. So there may be some repositioning of the city's business technical assistance program dollars to do some more specific COVID-19 response that we obviously weren't planning for 4 months ago. But not adding new costs beyond that which is already budgeted. So I think that's how I would answer that question specifically.
Great. Thank you very much. I've got Councilmember Cunningham in queue, followed by Councilmember Goodman. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you both for this presentation. This has been very informative during this unknown time as we're trying to navigate that together. So this has been helpful. So I have two things. The first is the information. You would ask for information that would be helpful. We've talked about this a few times around the need for budget forecasting to be able to look at more of like the long-term implications. And I think, you know, the intention behind my request for that was for us to be able to kind of have an idea of when a recession could happen and then how to be able to prepare for that and be intentional. So now we know one is going to happen. And so I guess it's kind of like, how serious is it going to be? What are the expectations for how long it's going to ripple into the future? That sort of information would be really helpful for me as a council member when it comes to making financial decisions related to the budget. And then also, and again, we've talked about this, but I just want to make sure that we're having a larger conversation about it, is, you know, there is the ability to be able to say, we're just going to keep things at the current service levels, and, you know, like we won't have, I'm just using like this as a general example, we won't have any new change items, we'll just do the current service levels. But how do we know if the current service levels and what is currently allocated is working, and that those are good investments, and that it's worthwhile for us to continue to invest in those specific things? Whereas if we had a clear base budget analysis, even deeper than Results Minneapolis. I know we have Results Minneapolis, but like even deeper into that around how the money is being spent, and the impacts that the various programs are having, the various investments. If we find out what's not working, then we have the ability to free up those dollars and invest it where we need it, based on the implications of a recession. So if we need more investment in small businesses, if we need more investment in you know, vulnerable families being able to stay in their housing, like it would still be able to allow us to free up some space. And so I guess it's sort of a question, sort of a suggestion around, you know, like, how are we actually going to be digging into it so that we're not just saying everything should stay the same, no new change items, and current service level stays as is? Has there been any conversations yet around an analysis? And if not, can we put that on the table? So, thank you.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Cunningham, yes, so let me step back first to sort of the long-term implications in our budget forecasting work that we're doing. My team, the budget office staff, has really been working on this for about 2 weeks, specific to this coming COVID crisis that we find ourselves in now. And we've built a new model to help us understand what those revenue impacts that I spoke to you about, how those sort of flow through our budget. That's being used to inform the cash flow analysis for our current need. But then it is a tool that will also be useful in the coming years, into next year, depending on the length of whatever recession may follow our current reality. So we are putting those tools in place right now. There's no day like a crisis to solidify sort of vision and thinking and work, and so we're working as quickly as we can to get that in place place so that we're able to provide that information to you all to apply your judgment to make those decisions. With respect to, I think that the other half of your comment really speaks to wanting to make sure that we're not sort of blindly saying everything's okay, or we're not sort of blindly saying everything needs to be cut by 10 or 20% if that's the reality that we're in the future. By no means am I saying I know that to be true, but just using that as a figure. I think I certainly agree with that thinking, and what we're what we've talked with the mayor's team about is looking more specifically, much to your point, about department by department, program by program, where is that flex, even in this year, but in future years, so that we all understand that the current service level today was put into place with the best thinking over time, but now we need to tomorrow apply tomorrow's best thinking to the future. So I think all the points are well taken, and we're definitely on that track.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for letting me comment, and probably what I want to say is a little bit more of a comment than a question. Mr. Intermill and Lori, thank you for everything that you're putting together. I've been through this once before, and we're not going to be talking about current service levels. We're going to be talking about major reductions in service. And I want to remind everybody, without being Debbie Downer or alarmist, that 70% of all of the money we spend in the city is in people. And so when we're looking at a reduction in service level, we're talking about laying off people. And so we need to do, I think, what our finance department has done so well at this point, which is conserve cash as well as refocus existing programs, especially as it pertains to economic development. We don't need to be giving people money to buy buildings right now, unless they have bank financing and they're ready to buy a building. We can't be the first money in on economic development deals anymore, or our money will be sitting there for long periods of time. We need to take those existing programs and rethink them to deal with the crisis at hand. I get emotional about it because I've been through mass layoffs. I've been through pay freezes. It took years and years to go from and we had no property tax increase. So when I see maps like the one the assessor put out, and I've already sent a somewhat alarming note to Andrea and Lisa today, when I see things like people are going to see their property tax value increase by 10%, but they know the economy now doesn't support that value, but we can't do anything about that because that's what the state requires us to do. People are going to get valuation notices in the next couple of weeks saying their property increased in value, but at the moment it didn't. And then if we have the regular 6% increase compounded on the 10% property tax value, we are going to have a crisis in the housing market also. And I'm very, very worried that housing instability as a result of taxes is going to create a bigger problem overall. So I'm not offering up solutions in a public meeting, in a public conversation right now, only to say that anyone who's thinking that we're going to be able to be offering financial assistance to anyone at this point will be compared against keeping our own employees working. And it's just the tough reality. We don't know at this point what's going to happen. The Dow was up today, but as a percentage, the amount is so much lower that an 11% increase isn't 11% of what it was 3 weeks ago. And we also know that people aren't going to be able to make payments, licenses, fees, taxes. By not working, they're not going to have the money to make some of these payments. So we need to be working together, and thoughtful about how to hold up those who are most in pain right now, while remembering that we might have to make choices by putting other people in our city family at risk by laying off staff people, which I personally think is the worst thing I've ever had to go through. So I would ask our finance staff, and I've talked to Mark Ruff about this, if we don't just maybe look at what happened during the financial crisis How did we tax moving forward? I don't think we increased property taxes for years. Look at what we did in terms of our employees. What did we do with our existing employees? I know we had a pay freeze for, I believe, 5 years. So even if this ends quickly, and I would describe quickly as 12 weeks, 8, 10, 12 weeks, the hit the economy will have taken as a result of us will mean that we will not have a $1.6 billion budget this year, probably, or next year. And so just being aware of all of that, I think, is really important. I know CPED's really aware of it because we talked today about redirecting resources to business development for small businesses, and they're already working on that. So I just wanted to say that, and that's why I'm paying more attention to Ways and Means, and I really appreciate the leadership of Council President Bender and Council Vice President Jenkins. I really feel like people have come together, and I think that's really needed right now because it's going to be really scary, and I'm not sure you guys really realize the amount of trauma that potentially could come from this. And so, just remember, we're a group of 4,000 people who work in the city, and we're all doing the best we can. And our job is to try to come together to make sure that everyone in our city family can make it, and then our larger city economically can make it too. So I just want to, I don't mean to be Debbie Downer about it. I just want to make sure everyone understands the financial reality. And the first chart didn't look like that big of a deal, but 40% loss of revenue with sales tax is massive. It means we might not be able to make payments on our bonds at the convention center and the Target Center. Forget about giving the Viking Stadium any money. That's in the waterfall, by the way. We should be backing off of what we're doing and rethinking what's going to happen going forward. And I trust that our staff knows this and can do it. So, Mr. Chair, thank you for allowing me to pontificate for a moment, and I'll stop now. Thanks.
I appreciate you sharing your perspective. Thank you. Councilmember Kano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two questions for staff. One is around the impact of a potential federal stimulus or support package for the American people. Do you, as staff right now, given the information that's available, do you have any projections about what that could be in terms of how much support would that bring to our local community, and whether that would have an impact on some of our projections?
So, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Kano, that's a good question. We have not done that analysis yet, but we will certainly add that to our list. I think that one of the challenges is dollars going to an individual are a very good start, but if that individual then can't go to a business to spend them because of the social distancing, then that poses a little bit of a challenge to the dollars then circulating through the economy. But we can definitely take a look at that and get some more robust information back to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. My other questions about, typically under a non-emergency situation, there's been a pretty predictable time frame and process for how the city puts together the budget, where there's ample opportunity for residents and for the voting populace to chime in on what they think our priorities should be. I think in the past we even flirted with the idea of this participatory budgeting system. I'm not quite sure where that is because that was not one of my projects, but my point really is about what is the anticipated sort of process and time frame for putting together the budget this year? Do we anticipate the same kind of mechanisms to kick in where, the mayor puts it together by a certain time, and then there's a budget address, and then the council tackles it? And I guess I would say it's more about like this moving target of when this uncertainty, when do we not have the luxury to continue to play with uncertainty. When do we start actually, you know, we have to make decisions because we know that things can change month to month, but I don't know if we can essentially treat the budget as like a document that's going to change month to month all the way up until December. And so I'm just trying to get a sense from you and your leadership team about sort of the certainty that we can have when we're going to start putting the budget together and making these, coalescing around these decisions and leading up to a final adoption vote in December.
Sure. Mr. Chair and Councilmember Cano, I think that the timeline, I'm more sure about timeline than I am about process. So the timeline is laid out in charter. The mayor must make that budget recommendation by August 15th, and I have not heard any plan to shift from having that speech done on August 15th. And then the other sort of milestones laid out by either charter or state law are the Board of Estimate and Taxation then is required to set the maximum property tax levy by the end of September, and then council needs to hold a truth and taxation hearing by the end of November roughly, and then we need to adopt that budget prior to next year so that we can get the spending done. I know that in past years, and this predates my time, but the history that I understand at the city is there have been cases, you know, particularly in the early 2000s when there was economic uncertainty at that time, and some LGA unallotments that necessitated at the time sort of a budget waterfall. So if this happens, we will go with option A. If then the next thing happens, we go to the next scenario. I think that is a tough environment to live in, not only for departments just to continue to operate, but also for staff. I know that, you know, much to Councilmember Goodman's really well-founded comments, the uncertainty that is created in staff can be hard. And we want to avoid that to the extent possible. So what we will be doing as a budget office and our finance leadership is trying to bring a comprehensive set of options to policymakers so that you can sort of see a scale of what the reality might be. And I think with respect to when does uncertainty end, I don't know right now, and I can't put a time frame on it, but I think that the way that we will help you deal with that uncertainty is to bring multiple scenarios so that you know, it's not the metaphor I keep coming back to, and I've been hearing from our state leaders is it's a dial, it's not a switch. And I think that's the right way for us to think about responding in the face of all of this uncertainty.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I can almost envision us, you know, every quarter, you know, it's like this is the budget we would approve, you know, if like the whole year was this quarter, and it really does. I understand that it will fluctuate a lot depending on how the federal government and the state government respond to the situation. And we've heard that we should anticipate waves of 5 months. So for 5 months, we might be in social isolation, and then there might be a small period of time where we kind of try to get back into the groove, and then we might have to hit that 5-month mark again because of a resurfacing of the virus until we can reach herd immunity. And of course, that really depends on when the vaccine is released to the public. And I understand they have to make the vaccine first. I'll just say last that I have heard a lot from residents and small business owners in the 9th Ward about the importance of continuing to promote local support of the local economy by making sure that you're ordering online from your local businesses. And so doing the takeout doing the online purchasing of goods and items in your small local businesses is really important for the health of our community, because these are literally the people who are our neighbors, the people who pay taxes, people who own homes and who rent in our neighborhoods. And so I think it's really important that as we talk about this budget, we also talk about how we, as a local community in charge of our local dollars, are able to continue to relay that message of investing in our local businesses, continuing to be their patrons and encourage others to do the same by using our newsletters to share that message, by highlighting some of those businesses in our social media, and just continuing to ask people to, you can do social distancing, you can practice that at home, even if there's a shelter in place ruling where folks can still interact using the internet, and helping those local mom and pop shops and those neighborhood owned places to continue to, stay afloat in the economy by making sure that we're supporting them too. Thank you.
Ms. Johnson, you had a comment or a question?
Yes, I did. Thank you. I just wanted to say I appreciate the comments from the council, and I want to reassure you that the finance department, we have been thinking long and hard about these issues, and they're on the forefronts of our mind. I went through the 2008, 2007, earlier 2000 recession. I know how difficult it is to lay off employees. It is an incredibly difficult thing to do. I hope to never have to do it again, but we're in a different time. And like I say, I just want to reassure you that the finance department will be looking into these. We are looking at contracts that we can adjust, pull back, things, and reprioritizing where our dollars go, because you have a finite pool of dollars. We need to make sure we spend them where the council wants to spend them, on the highest priorities. So again, appreciate your comments, and we will definitely take them to heart and provide information to you that you need to make good decisions.
Thank you for that. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The one thing I didn't say before that I wanted to note is we've received so much more support from the state of Minnesota than we did last time. It's really notable to me, and I think it needs to be said out loud. I forget, I'm not just sitting in my house talking to you, my colleagues and friends, but other people might see this as well. And I think it's really impossible to quantify the quality of help from this governor and lieutenant governor and administration. It's like I'm shocked by it, actually, because we were so used to the opposite. I mean, I was here when they slashed our local government aid. I think it was by like $50 or $60 million in those times, which would be even more now. So I don't want to speak to the federal government. I guess I want to see what the bailout package looks like, but the state has been incredible, and they're super conscious of what cities are doing, and they're conscious of cities as their partners. And this is a big difference than what happened last time. So I don't feel like we're out there alone. I feel like we're more knowledgeable, all of us collectively, because we've been through this before, and that the state's really there to back us up in the leadership, and all of the people that have worked within the departments who have been helpful. So I just want to point out there are many bright and shining stars of people in government, staff and electeds working on this. That's a very notable difference.
Thank you. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm curious, will this have any impact on the timeline for the building of the public service building?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Cunningham, in speaking with our interim city coordinator, Mark Ruff, he has spoken with the builders, and at this point in time, it's all full steam ahead, continuing to proceed with the construction as planned.
Correct.
And continuing allocating the dollars as we have been. Okay, great. Thank you for that information.
Thank you, everyone. I don't see anyone else in queue, so I'll just make a couple of closing comments. And if anybody has any final questions or comments they wanted to get in, please do get in queue. I think we're all taking this very seriously, and I won't speak for everybody else, but I know everybody's having similar experiences around their wards just from the comments that we've heard. my experience of the last week and a half has been a series of absolutely heartbreaking conversations with workers, with business owners, with freelancers, with people who are watching what they've built for years and years and years be threatened. They know with every week it's going to get harder and harder to hold on and be able to be there when we are all able to reemerge into public life. And we know that when you try to think about the cascading impacts of that, of the nonprofits that are going to go under, that ordered from the vendors that are going to go under because they don't get the orders, that have rippling effects, all of these throughout, and this is something that we're going to have a very challenging time, and it is going to take all of us, working together to work through. And we know we're going to need support at every level of government and at every level of community and philanthropy and everything else to make this work. I think one of the things that I'm most proud of about our city is that we care about people and that we act in the public good and that we are acting in the interest of public health. And that comes at a cost. And it is not, we are not presenting a financial presentation today to say we should argue against acting in the public health or acting in the public good. But we are saying we need to proceed in a clear-headed way, knowing the cost, understanding that we are incurring real cost to look out for each other, and that we all need to do our parts to make this work, because we're incurring those costs, whether people do their part to social distance or not, whether people take their personal responsibility for the part of it that they can do. And it's absolutely critical that we all move forward. And I so appreciate that the timing of this presentation worked out to be able to get this kind of an update. I think this is critically important that we all have in our minds an awareness that we are making sacrifices and that those sacrifices are going to come due, and that we need to be incredibly thoughtful about it, because as Councilmember Goodman reminded us, we are talking about people. When we let businesses fail, we are talking about people. When we look at adjusting our own city budget, we are talking about people. And it's critically important that we keep our focus on that through this committee and through all of our council work. And I think it's evidence of that everybody took so long to really dig into this today, that so many people who aren't on the committee joined us and are paying attention. And I'm grateful to everybody who contributed to this conversation and who's paying attention and who is doing their part for this community. So with that, I don't see anybody else in queue. So we have completed this agenda. I'll instruct the clerk to receive and file this report, and we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.